There is a question that many people ask themselves silently, almost with shame, as if admitting it were a sign of weakness or naivety. It is a question that appears at the most unexpected moments, when something goes right without us having fully planned it, when a door opens just as another one was closing, when we meet someone who changes the course of our story, or when we look back and discover that what seemed like a stumble was actually the first step towards something extraordinary. The question is this: does chance really exist, or is there something deeper behind everything that happens to us? Is life a sequence of random, meaningless events? Or is there some form of intelligence, some invisible logic that connects the moments of our existence in ways that we are not always able to understand at the moment in which they happen? Think for a moment about your own story. Think about that moment that changed your life. It could have been a conversation that you had not planned. It could have been a decision made at the last second. It may have been a loss that deeply hurt you, and yet, over time, revealed something to you that you would never have discovered otherwise. Think back to that moment and ask yourself honestly, was it coincidence? Was it blind luck? Or was there something in you? Something in the way you were present? Something in your previous choices? Something in the person you already were or were building, or that made that encounter, that opening, that transformation possible? Let me share with you a reflection that I have been exploring for many years, and that the more I observe it in people's lives, the more convinced I am that it contains a fundamental truth. Nothing happens by chance. I do not say this from a mystical perspective or from a magical vision of existence. I say it from the honest observation of what happens when a person begins to live consciously, when they begin to make decisions aligned with their deepest values, when they develop the capacity to be truly present in each moment of their life. I say this because I have seen time and time again that what we call chance almost always has roots that we ourselves have sown many times without realizing it. There is a story that I like to share when I talk about this topic. A few years ago, I met a person who had been feeling stagnant for a long time. She felt that life was passing her by, that opportunities were coming to others and eluding her. When we analyzed her situation together, she always repeated the same phrase, "It's just that I'm not lucky." She said it with absolute conviction, as if it were an objective fact, as if she had been born with an invisible mark that excluded her from the possibilities that life offered to other human beings. And what was interesting was not what she said, but what she did, or rather what she didn't do, based on that belief. Because when someone believes that they are not lucky, they stop preparing, they stop trying as hard, they stop being present in the conversations that could open doors, they stop taking the step that could connect them with something new, and by not doing all of that, they confirm their own belief. The chance that awaits never arrives, precisely because she stopped creating the conditions for it to arrive. And here's something important that I want you to remember. What we call chance in most cases is nothing more than the encounter between a prepared mind and a favorable circumstance. It is the intersection between who we already are, what we have built, what we have learned, what we have had the courage to try, and the moment when the world offers us an opening. That opening may seem random from the outside. It may seem that it simply appeared. But if you look carefully, if you observe the ground beneath, you will almost always find seeds that someone planted, decisions that someone made, attitudes that someone cultivated for days, months, or years before that opportunity appeared. Imagine for a moment a farmer. The farmer does not control the rain. He does not control the sun. He does not control exactly when the storm will come or how many days of drought will have to be endured before the sky opens up again. But the farmer does prepare the soil. The farmer does choose carefully which seeds to plant. The farmer does take care of the soil, nourishes it, protects it, and works it with patience and perseverance. And when the rain comes, which no one knows exactly when it will arrive, his field is ready to receive it. The field of the farmer who did not prepare the soil also receives the same rain, but produces completely different results. The rain is the same. The difference is in what was there before the rain fell. That is exactly what happens with what we call chance in our lives. The favorable moment can arrive for many people at the same time, but only those who have prepared their inner soil, who have cultivated their abilities, who have developed the necessary awareness to recognize the opportunity when it appears, only they are capable of reaping the fruits. Perhaps you have never stopped to consider this, but every time something good happens to you in a seemingly unexpected way, there is a chain of decisions, attitudes, efforts, and presences that made it possible. And every time something bad happens to you, there is also a chain of learnings, redirections, and revelations that, if you are willing to look at them honestly and openly, can become the most powerful fertilizer you will ever have in your life. Let me tell you about something I see all too often, and I think it is one of the biggest obstacles to understanding this truth. We live in a culture that has taught us to view life in discrete episodes. We tend to see each moment as if it were independent of the ones that came before it. Today says success has nothing to do with the effort you made 3 years ago. This week's encounter has nothing to do with the decision you made 6 months ago. The opportunity that is opening up now has nothing to do with the person you chose to be during the difficult times of the past year, but the reality is completely different. Life is not a series of disconnected episodes. Life is an ongoing narrative in which each chapter influences the next in ways that we are sometimes unable to see until we look back at it from a certain distance. Physicists have a concept that I find remarkably applicable to human experience. They talk about complex systems, those systems in which small changes in initial conditions produce radically different outcomes over time. A small decision made today can have enormous consequences tomorrow. A sustained attitude over weeks can completely transform the course of a life in the span of a few years. And this works in both directions. Both the decisions that elevate us and the decisions that limit us have a cumulative effect that goes far beyond what we are able to perceive at the time we make them. And here's something important that I want to explore with you in more depth, because I think it is one of the most transformative points of this whole reflection. If nothing happens by chance, if there is a deeper logic behind the events of our lives, then that implies something that may feel uncomfortable at first, but when truly understood becomes one of the most powerful sources of freedom there is. It implies that we are much more responsible for our experience than we are generally willing to admit. Not in the simplistic sense that everything that happens to us is our fault, but in the profound and liberating sense that we are co-creators of our reality, that our attitudes, our beliefs, our daily decisions, our way of responding to challenges, all of these contribute significantly to shaping the life that we are living. Think about the difference between two people who are going through exactly the same adverse circumstance. Imagine that they both lose their jobs at the same time, in the same economic conditions, with similar responsibilities. The first person enters a state of paralysis, becomes convinced that the world is against them, that they are unlucky, that things never get better for someone like them, and from that conviction makes decisions that confirm exactly that belief. They isolate themselves, they close themselves off, they stop searching with the same energy, they stop learning, they stop connecting. The second person also feels the pain, they also go through fear, they also have moments of doubt and anguish. But at some point, that person makes an internal decision that changes everything. He decides that this situation, as tough as it may be, contains something that can teach him. He decides that although he does not control what he lost, he does control what he does with the space that he now has available. And from that decision, he begins to move in a different way. He begins to learn something new. He begins to connect with people he did not know before. He begins to discover abilities that were dormant. And over time, that person who was unlucky in losing his job ends up finding something that he would never have found if things had continued as before. Was what happened to the second person luck? From the outside, it may seem that way. From the outside, it may seem that he was luckier than the first, but if you look closely, what he had was a different attitude, a different choice, a different inner disposition towards the same external reality. And that inner difference was what produced a completely different external difference. Let me share with you another reflection that I think can be very revealing. There is a widespread illusion that I think is important to dismantle, and that is the illusion that people who seem to be very lucky in life got to where they are because the universe chose them, because they were born at the right time, because they were in the right place without any merit of their own. And sometimes when we look at the lives of people we admire, who have built something extraordinary, who live with an energy and fulfillment that inspires us, we tend to think that they have something that we don't have, that they received something that we weren't given, that life was more generous with them than with us. But when you have the opportunity to get to know these people's stories in depth, when you go beyond the external image and delve into the years of effort, doubt, learning, falls, and rises that lie behind what you see today, you almost always discover something that completely transforms that initial perception. You discover that it wasn't luck that brought them to where they are. It was perseverance. It was their attitude in the face of adversity. It was the decision to keep learning when it would have been easier to give up. It was the ability to stay open when fear invited them to close themselves off. It was ultimately the way they chose to live day by day, moment by moment, for a long time before the world began to see the results of that way of life. And here's something important that I think is essential to understand. It is not about denying that there are circumstances that are beyond our control. They exist. There are life contexts that are more difficult than others. There are situations of real injustice that we cannot romanticize. There are pains that cannot be explained by the attitudes of those who experience them. All of that is true and deserves to be acknowledged with honesty and compassion. But within those circumstances, within that framework that we do not choose, there is always a space, sometimes small, sometimes larger, that does depend on us. And it is in that space where our true freedom resides. It is in that space where our decisions, our attitude, our way of responding to what happens to us have real and concrete power over the course of our existence. Viktor Frankl, who survived the Nazi concentration camps and who built an entire school of thought from that extreme experience, said something that seems extraordinarily lucid to me. He said that between stimulus and response, there is a space, and that in that space resides our freedom and our capacity to grow. That statement, which was born from one of the most terrible contexts that a human being can go through, contains a truth that is applicable to every moment of our daily lives. Between what happens to us and what we do with what happens to us, there is always a space. And in that space, even if it is sometimes tiny, even if it is sometimes difficult to find, in the midst of pain or fear, we experience our true capacity for choice. Imagine for a moment that you begin to live from this awareness. Imagine that every morning, instead of wondering what the day will bring, you ask yourself what you are going to contribute to that day. Instead of waiting to see what opportunities come your way, you ask yourself what seeds you can plant today so that something valuable can bloom tomorrow. Instead of wondering if you will get lucky, you ask yourself if you're being the person you want to be, if you're making choices that are aligned with what truly matters to you, if you're growing in the directions that give your existence meaning. That's a profound transformation. It's not a change in circumstances, it's a change in perspective. And changes in perspective are what truly change lives. Let me talk to you now about something that has to do with the way we interpret difficult moments, because I think it's one of most important themes of this whole reflection, and one that most influences what we end up building with our lives. We tend to divide events into good and bad. Something goes well for us, and we classify it as good luck. Something goes wrong for us, and we classify it as bad luck. And that classification, although completely understandable from an emotional point of view, has a very profound consequence. It blinds us to the value that may be present in what we call evil, and it blinds us to the learning of what may be present in what we call good. There is an old story that I find profoundly wise and that I want to share with you. There was once an old man who lived with his son in a small village. One day, their only horse ran away. The neighbors came to console them. "What bad luck," they said. The old man replied simply, "Perhaps." A few days later, the horse returned, bringing with it several wild horses. The neighbors returned, this time in awe. "What good luck," they said. The old man replied, "Perhaps." A short time later, the old man's son tried to tame one of the new horses and fell off and broke his leg. "What bad luck," the neighbors said. "Perhaps," the old man replied. Weeks later, soldiers came to the village looking for young men to take to war. The old man's son, with his broken leg, was the only one who did not have to go. "What good luck," the neighbors said. The old man replied once more, "Perhaps." This story embodies a wisdom that goes far beyond its apparent simplicity. It speaks to the limitations of our immediate judgments. It reminds us that we are not always able to see, at the moment something happens, the full meaning of that event, that what today seems like a loss may be the door to something that tomorrow we will recognize as a gift, that what today seems like a fortune may be the beginning of a lesson that we are not yet able to anticipate, and that, therefore, the attitude of openness, of presence, of willingness to learn from each circumstance independently, entirely from its apparent sign. That attitude is not naivete, it is an extraordinarily intelligent way of living. Think about your own story again. Was there a moment that at the time seemed like a failure and that in time you recognized as one of the most important turning points in your life? Was there a loss that opened a door for you that you would never have otherwise seen? Was there a no that you received that, looking back on it now from a distance, you realize that it was the best yes that could have come to you indirectly? Almost everyone, when they honestly ask themselves this question, finds at least one such moment in their history. And that finding is profoundly revealing, because it shows us that life has a logic that is not always visible from the present, but that often becomes transparent from the future. And here is something important that I want to explore in more detail, because I believe it is one of the most practical and most transformative aspects of all that we are talking about. If life has a deeper logic, if nothing truly happens by chance, then one of the most powerful questions we can ask ourselves in any circumstance is this: what is this trying to teach me? Not from a position of passive resignation, but from a position of active curiosity and genuine openness to learning. What information is in this situation? What capacity is it inviting to develop in me? What belief is it challenging? What value is it testing? Where is it redirecting me? When you begin to ask yourself these questions genuinely, something extraordinary happens. You stop listening, being a passenger in your own life and becoming its protagonist. You stop waiting for circumstances to change so that you can start living the way you want to, and you start finding within the present circumstances the resources, lessons, and possibilities that you need to move forward. That doesn't mean that everything is perfect. It doesn't mean that there's no pain. It doesn't mean that there aren't moments of uncertainty or fear. It simply means that your way of relating to all of that changes radically, and with that different relationship, what you're capable of building also changes. There's a distinction that I think is crucial and that I want to share with you because I think it clarifies much of what we're exploring. It's the distinction between what happens and what we do with what happens. Yeah. What happens is often not in our hands. We can influence many things, but we don't control everything. We don't control the economy. We don't control the health of the people we love. We don't control the decisions of others. We don't control the historical moment in which we were born or the family context in which we grew up. Those are realities that precede us and that surround us. But what we do with everything is that the interpretation we choose, the response we construct, the attitude with which we present ourselves before each circumstance, that is in our hands in a much deeper and much more constant way than we generally recognize. And it is precisely there, in that space between what happens and what we do with what happens, where the life we want to live is built. That is where luck ceases to be something that is received and becomes something that is created. That is where chance ceases to be the protagonist of our story and returns to us the role that always belonged to us. Let me share with you a little more about the nature of the invisible connections that shape our lives, because I believe it is one of the most fascinating and most underrated aspects of the human experience. So, when we say that nothing happens by chance, one of the most evident manifestations of that truth has to do with the people we meet along our path. There are encounters that seem fortuitous, conversations that seem accidental, connections that seem to arise out of nowhere, and that nevertheless end up being absolutely decisive for the course of a life. But if you look closely at the nature of those encounters, if you ask yourself what was inside you at the moment they happened, you discover something revealing. You discover that those seemingly chance encounters had a precondition. You were open to them, you were present. You were in a physical, emotional, or mental place that made it possible for that connection to happen. If you had been closed off, if you had been distracted, if you had chosen not to go to that place, not to attend that event, not to have that conversation, the encounter would not have happened, or it would have happened, and you would not have recognized it. Because one of the most important aspects of creating our own luck is developing the ability to recognize opportunities when they appear, and that ability is cultivated, not received. There are people who walk through life with their eyes and hearts closed, not because they are bad people, but because fear, unprocessed pain, limiting beliefs that they carry with them like an invisible weight prevent them from seeing what is right in front of them. And there are people who walk with an openness that allows them to perceive possibilities where others only see obstacles, connections where others only see connections, strangers, lessons where others only see failures. That difference in the ability to perceive is not innate. It is developed, cultivated, chosen day by day with each small decision to look at life from openness instead of closure, from curiosity instead of judgment, from responsibility instead of victimhood. And this brings me to one of the concepts that I am most passionate about exploring, which is the concept of purpose. Because I believe that there is a profound connection between living with purpose and experiencing that feeling that life has meaning, that things are connected, that nothing happens without a reason. When a person lives aligned with what truly matters to them, when their daily actions are connected to their deepest values, when they have clarity about why they do what they do, something extraordinary happens. They begin to see connections that they did not see before. They begin to find resources that they did not find before. They begin to bring into their life people, situations, and circumstances that are consistent with that direction that they have chosen. It is not magic. It is coherence. When you know what you are looking for, you begin to see it in places where you previously passed by without noticing it. When you have clarity about your values, decisions that were previously confusing become clearer. When you live with purpose, you have an internal criterion that helps you recognize what is relevant and what is not. No, at all times. And that clarity, that coherence, that alignment between who you are, what you believe, and what you do is one of the most powerful conditions for creating what the world sees from the outside as good luck. Think for a moment about the people you know who seem to live with a special energy, Those people whose eyes light up when they talk about what they do new. Those people who face challenges with a resilience that surprises you. Those people who, no matter how many obstacles they encounter, always seem to have the ability to find a way out, a new possibility, a reason to keep moving forward. What do they have in common? Almost always when you get closer to their story, you discover that they have purpose. They have something that moves them from within, not just from without. And that internal drive, that purpose that gives direction and meaning to their decisions, is what gives them the resilience, clarity, and openness that the world interprets as luck or talent. Special. Purpose is not something you receive as a gift. It is something you discover, build, and refine through experience, reflection, and honesty with yourself. And it doesn't have to be something grandiose or heroic. The most powerful purpose is the one that is genuinely yours, the one that emerges from the most authentic part of your being, the one that connects your capabilities with what the world needs, the one that gives you a reason to get up every morning that goes beyond duty or fear. When you find that purpose and start living from it, it changes the texture of your daily experience in ways that are hard to describe, but that are completely palpable to those who live them. Let me talk to you now about something that I think is fundamental to integrating everything we've been exploring, and that is the question of consciousness. Because ultimately, the difference between living as if chance determines everything and living from the understanding that we are co-creators of our experience, that difference is fundamentally a difference of consciousness. It's the difference between living automatically, reactively, guided by fear or through inherited patterns, and living consciously, thoughtfully, aligned with who we truly choose to be. Awareness is the ability to observe our own life from a certain distance. It is the ability to realize that we are thinking what we are thinking, that we are feeling what we are feeling, that we are choosing what we are choosing, even when it seems that we are simply reacting. Awareness is what allows us to get out of autopilot and enter the space of genuine choice. And when we live from that space, when we make the decisions of our lives from consciousness and not from automaticity, the quality of those decisions changes radically, and with it, the quality of the life we build. Developing awareness is not a process that happens all at once. It is daily practice. It is the practice of pausing before reacting. It is the practice of asking ourselves, what is really motivating our decisions? It is the practice of revisiting our beliefs and asking ourselves if they are still true for us or if we are simply carrying them out of inertia. It is the practice of looking at our life with honesty and compassion at the same time, without judging ourselves harshly, but without deluding ourselves gently either. It's the practice of being truly present in the moments that we're living, rather than always dwelling in the past or the future. And when you cultivate that awareness on a sustained basis, something that once seemed like a mystery begins to become transparent. You begin to see the connections. You begin to understand how your decisions from a while ago are producing the results of today. You begin to recognize the patterns that repeat themselves in your life and ask yourself what they have to teach you. You begin to see that the encounters that seemed random were actually deeply rooted in who you were or who you were becoming. You begin to understand from experience and not just from theory that nothing truly happens by chance. And I want to close with something that I think is profoundly important and that I think encapsulates the spirit of everything we've explored together today. Living from the understanding that nothing happens by chance is not an invitation to presumption or control. It's not about believing that we can control everything that happens to us because we can't. And that illusion of absolute control is in itself a source of suffering. It is about something much subtler and much more powerful. It is about recognizing that we are significant actors in the drama of our own existence, that our attitudes matter, that our choices leave their mark, that the way we choose to live each day, even the ordinary days, even the difficult days, Even the days when nothing seems to be going according to plan, that way of living is constantly helping to shape what is to come. It is about living with the awareness that we are sowers, that what we plant today will influence what we harvest tomorrow, even though we cannot always see exactly how or exactly when, that the moments of generosity that no one sees have value, that the efforts that seem to lead nowhere are preparing a soil that we cannot yet see, that the choices of integrity that we make in the dark, when no one is watching, when it would be easier to do otherwise, those choices are building the kind of person we will be when the time comes, when it matters most. Nothing happens by chance, not because the universe has a rigid plan for each of us that we must follow without choice, but because we are guided by the laws of nature. But because we are beings endowed with consciousness, will, and the extraordinary capacity to reflect on our own existence and to choose who we want to be within the circumstances we find ourselves in. And that capacity, that profound freedom that no external circumstance can completely take away from us, is what makes every decision we make, every attitude we cultivate, every value we honor have real weight in the scale of what we end up living. Good luck is not something we receive. It is something that is built patiently, consciously, with each small choice we make in the direction of what truly matters. And life, that life that sometimes seems so unpredictable, so difficult to decipher, actually has a beautiful logic that is revealed to those who have the courage to live it with consciousness, with purpose, and with the willingness to learn from each moment, especially the most difficult ones. That is all that life needs from us. Presence, awareness, responsibility, openness, and the deep conviction. And that who we are and what we choose matter, even if the world does not yet know it, even if we cannot yet see it clearly reflected in the results that surround us, because results always come later, and when they come, they rarely seem like a coincidence to those who have paid attention to the path that made them possible.